A little
This
after
meeting is
10.
being recorded.
A little after 10, so I would say, yeah, go ahead
Yeah.
and get started.
All right, that sounds like a plan. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this. I know you can still see me probably, but I minimize that so you can see my screen. So for Lynn and Nancy, I am Tina Beard. I am the owner of Tamarack Genealogy, but as Nancy and I were talking about, I'm also the genealogy and local history librarian at the Plainfield Public Library. So in my capacity as a librarian, in my capacity as a genealogist, in as my capacity as an archivist, my degree is in archiving. I spent a lot of time in archives. And what I want people to kind of keep in mind is the fact, oh goodness, I don't want that. I want to make that smaller. That there are a slew of different types of archives. So I don't want you to think that, oh, an archives is just federal or municipal in nature. There are a lot of different types of archives that exist out there that can benefit us as a researcher. So things like corporate archives. A lot of times these are closed to the public, but they can be accessible if you're looking for particular things. We'll talk about that in more detail. Things like digital archives, things that are um, digitized physical objects that have been made available online. And then there are what are called born digital collections, meaning that they were strictly created in a digital fashion, and there's not a hard copy that goes along with that. Things that we already recognize as archives, federal repositories, things like museum and historical or genealogical society archives. But then things like religious archives. And I'll talk a little bit about my visit this summer to the Presbyterian Historical Society, to their archives, and then state and municipal archives as well. So think of city archives. So City of Chicago or like the City of Champaign or somebody else that has an archive specifically for records pertaining to the city and its residents. And then university archives, I think, get a lot of short shrift. I think that people have a tendency to glaze over university archives because they think that, well, my family member didn't go to a university or didn't go to college, so therefore there's not going to be a reference to them. And that's very untrue. And I'm going to kind of show you the benefits of utilizing university archives as well. So let's talk a little bit about why we use archives, how are they arranged, and ways to prepare before you make that step to either schedule an appointment or drive to a facility and access their collections in person, right? So not only are we talking about paper documents and photographs, those textual items, those books, those manuscripts, those map collections. They have a lot of additional resources as well. So they can have things like 3D objects. So that could be military uniforms. That could be things like furniture, those kind of bigger, larger objects. But then there's AV materials available as well. Sometimes there's oral history recordings. Sometimes there's video recordings. Sometimes you'll get like full-length feature documentaries or other media formats. When you think of media, we have a tendency to strictly think now like, you know, streaming types of material. But think about how media has changed over the last 100 years, right? So there are a lot of archives that collect things like wax cylinders that used to be played, or Victrolas, or um, records, right? 33 and a thirds, or CDs, right? Think about all of that different media types, reel to reels, right? 8 millimeter films, um, beta tapes, right? All the different types of media formats that might exist out there. So we're not just talking about media in our 21st century mind, but media in maybe a 19th or 20th century format as well, right? They're going to have documents about the history and workings of their organization, whether it's the state archives and they have like gubernatorial papers or treasury papers, but then the institutions themselves. So if it's a historical society or a museum, they're going to have their internal working documents. So if you had somebody who worked for them or was on the board or maybe was on some kind of committee associated with them, they're going to have those kinds of records as well. So there's two layers when we think about archives. There's the stuff that they collect, and then there's the information about how they're run, what keeps them going, who were their founders, what types of paperwork do they have. And when you hear the term, there's a lot of times people refer to archives or archive interchangeably, but there's actually a difference between the two. So when we talk about archives, we're talking about physical collections and physical buildings. When we talk about archive, we're talking about digital media collections. So, if you look at Internet Archive, right, I'll talk a little bit about that. While they do have things that are digitized that were original paper documents, they don't own those original documents, right? They don't own necessarily all of those books or photos that people have scanned. They just have the digital version of that. So archive singular is when you're talking about digital media collections. Archives plural is when you're talking about physical objects in physical buildings. And when you visit archives, typically they're going to reference their collections based on a hierarchy. So when you think about going to the library and you want a new James Patterson book, right? Then you're going to go to the library and you're going to look in the catalog, and the catalog's going to tell you that his books are in fiction. And if it's part of a series, right? So if it's, an Alex Cross or if it's one of the other series, it's going to be by that series in fiction, alphabetical under the author's name. That's how archives are arranged. So fiction, nonfiction, right? That's your record group. Or if I'm looking for cookbooks, cookbooks could be my record group. And then the types of cookbooks, whether it's baking, whether it's gluten-free, whether it's grilling and barbecuing, those are the series within that overarching record group. So record groups are the highest level of that hierarchy, describing materials within the archives by a very general category. Be health records, military records, school records. And then the record series, like I said, we've got James Patterson in fiction, and then James Patterson, and then his series are what comes next. So that would be things like if it's military engagements. So Revolutionary War, Civil War, Spanish American War, World War One. And then sub-series would be things like Army, Navy, and then individual units. So, military records is a record group, series for Civil War, sub-series is Army. Within the Army, how is it arranged, right? The 1st Light Artillery, the 113th Engineers, the 330th Machine Gun Battalion, whatever it happens to be. So those series fall under that record group. And then the arrangement is kind of self-explanatory. So it's how are they putting these things together? Is it alphabetical? Is it chronological by date, or by like military engagement? Is it numerical? So it could be, again, we're looking at Civil War, we're looking at Army records, we're looking at records for the 1st Light Artillery. So it's done numerical. Or we're looking at, like, for example, Cook County Hospital records are at the NEIU archives within the IRAD system, and they're arranged chronologically by year. So I could look for volume 1908, right? And then go through it chronologically. Or, it might be something that's arranged alphabetical by place, right? So for some military records, they're arranged by base. So it could be Camp Grant, it could be Camp Dodge, it could be, Camp Meade, or it could be arranged alphabetical by the person, by the surname. So it just depends on how the arrangement breaks down based on the collection that they're housing. They're not all going to be the same. So some, even within a record series, might be arranged by location. Some might be arranged by unit, so, numerically, and some might be arranged alphabetical by soldier, commander, whoever it happens to be. So how do we know how this is going to break down? Each archives, regardless of the type, is going to have a series of databases or finding aids to help you dig deeper into those collections. So kind of the rule of thumb, the running joke in archives world is that you have 10% of your collection inventoried 100%. You're never going to have um, your collection fully inventoried at any given time. Um, some people say, well, you want to have 100% of your collection inventoried 10%. Well, then it becomes a lot harder to find things when you've only inventoried 10% of your collection. But these finding aids are kind of a tool to help you get into a specific collection. Now, finding aids can be useful, but like I said, a very small portion of archives are ever going to have their collections indexed 100%. So how do we use that to our advantage? So if, for example, I am looking for military records at the state archives, and I'm looking for Civil War records for the Army for the First Light Artillery. First Light Artillery is going to have a folder. They've been indexed to that level, but they probably have not been indexed down to listing every soldier in the unit or, every commander of every company. It might be First Light Artillery, companies A through I, and then that's it. So you won't know if your soldier is necessarily in these, but if you know the unit, so if I know that they're in company A or company D, I can pull that folder and I can look through it to see if my soldier is listed in it. So any hope of kind of just being able to search on Ira Jones, right, might not find what you're looking for. But if you know what unit he's in, or if you know what engagement he's in, you might still be able to get into those collections. But it's just because a lot of archives don't have the staffing and don't have especially for places like religious archives and historical society archives where it's all volunteer run and they don't have paid staff, to have those inventories built all the way down to the individual level. That doesn't mean they're not useful. It just means that the onus is going to be on you to dig through these records specifically. So before you go, there's always some things, some homework that you want to do before you set foot in the door, just to make sure that you're getting the most out of your visit. Usually when we're going to the archives, they're not next door. You're driving to it, right? Whether it's in the city of Chicago, whether it's in Springfield, whether it's out of state, whether, you're going to the NRS in Scotland and Edinburgh, you want to make sure you do your homework first. So first and foremost, most important is, are they open? What are their hours of business? Do they close during the day for lunchtime, right? Are they closed from noon to 1, or are they closed from, you know, 1 to 3? You always want to make sure you're checking for hours of business. You certainly want to be checking for holiday closures, and I'll give you a couple of stories on that in just a second. How many locations do they have? Because there are some archives facilities that span multiple buildings, and the information you're looking for might be in a different location than where you're starting your research. So you want to look into how many locations they might have, right? Are these documents even accessible to the public? Just because you have this record group does not mean necessarily that the public has access to 100% of it. So to kind of give you an example, I used to work at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I used to work in special collections under Sherry Byrne, and we had the Saul Bellow um, collection. When Professor Bellow passed away, his collection was donated back to the university, and we had access to all of his writings, right? We know he was a prolific author, but his student papers, his professorial papers were closed to the public. And they're closed for 75 years just to protect the privacy of the students. So just because they have something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be open. You always want to check the scope and the coverage to make sure they have the years and the specific topics and types of records you're looking for. So to give you an example, in Will County, the coroner's office has the coroner's inquest volumes, and they start in 1865 and they go all the way up into the 1950s before they converted it to microfilm. Volume D is missing. So, I think it's 1880 to 1885 is missing. Nobody has any idea where this book is. The scuttlebutt is they lent it to somebody to copy and index it, and they never got it back. So while yes, you could look and say, oh, they have coroner's records. This is fantastic. They start in 1865. There's a volume missing. So you need to make sure that they have what you're looking for. Ask about turnaround time. If you need copies of coroner's inquests, or if you need copies of probates or birth records or whatever it is, can I leave today with that item? Or do you have to page it and come back with it? So for example, if I go to Cook County, if I go to the circuit clerk and I need a probate, I need to request that probate in advance. Then they pull it from the archives on the west side. They bring it to the circuit court archives research room for me, but that can't happen the same day. Usually it takes a week to 2 weeks. So I have to either go in person and request my record, or I need to reach out to them and request that record if I know it exists. Here's the downside. If I don't know it exists, I have to go there. I have to find it in the microfilm. Then I have to request it. Then I have to wait until they call me and then come back. So ask what the turnaround time is in advance if you can, or when you're on site, am I going to take this home with me today? Same thing with where I live. I live in Kendall County Courthouse in Yorkville. I have to, and here's where, as an archivist, it makes my head explode. I have to go through the books. I have to put paper clips on the pages I want copied. Don't ever do this. It's so bad for the documents. And then I have to come back once they have them copied for me. Ask if you can use your own electronic devices. So a simple question is, can I take a picture of this with my phone and just pay for the copy? Or, do you allow scanners? Can I bring in a flatbed scanner or can I bring in one of those handheld wand scanners? If it's a public archive, so if it's someplace like federal archives or state archives, they're most likely going to tell you yes. Smaller archives like religious archives and municipal archives might say no, but it doesn't hurt to ask in advance. When I was at when I was in Philadelphia and I went to the Presbyterian Historical Society archives, they were fabulous. They were like, yes, take photos of whatever you want. And if you need to make copies, there's a copy machine. So ask if electronic devices are allowed, because that'll save you on the turnaround time. If you could just make a photocopy or take a picture of it, then you don't have to wait for them to physically copy it. Back to what I was saying about locations. If they have more than one location, it does not mean that they all have the same physical hours within their building. One location might close early, one location might close for lunch, one location might only be available by appointment. So you want to make sure that each of the locations that you need to visit, that you know what those hours are. Mostly so you can plan your day. So if one closes at 3 and another closes at 4, you can make sure you're finishing the research for the one that closes earlier. What are their pull times? Do they have the same pull times? So if you've gone to a national archives like NRS in Edinburgh, right, they pull once an hour. Some places might only pull requests once every 2 hours or twice a day. So if one of those locations says, oh yeah, we pull hourly, we can have records ready for you at 10 a.m. And another says, well, we only pull records twice a day. You want to make sure that you get your requests into that place that only pulls them twice a day so that they can be back and ready for you. You can go request those documents, then go to the hourly place, get those records done, because when you're done, then you know that that other location is going to have your records for you. And again, you know, are these things that I can photograph? Are these things that are available someplace else? And there's a lot of overlap in collections too. So are there microfilm records that I can access someplace else, right? So, for example, State Archives is a great example. I'll talk about this more. The State Archives has the originals, maybe, but maybe some of the IRAD centers have a copy of the microfilm. Can I go to one of these other facilities and view the microfilm at another time, right? So are they off site? Do you have them here? How can I access them? But then think about how are you going to get to these locations, right? Are they all within walking distance? Are they in the same building on different floors? Are they across town from each other? How am I going to pay to park? Is there a parking lot nearby? Is there a attendant that can give me change if I need it? Is there a shuttle that takes you back and forth between the locations? So I think Chris Rapinski at Michigan does this the best. He has a whole website about explaining how do you get in and out of the Michigan State Archives facility, where you park, how far is it from the door, how much is it going to cost. Not all facilities make this information available. So definitely make sure you do a little bit of digging and do your homework. So for example, National Archives in Washington, D.C. has a shuttle that will take you out to Archives 2 in College Park. Don't know if that shuttle is still running. Um, this year, it used to run every hour to take people back and forth between the two facilities. With there not being an archivist, a U.S. archivist at the moment, I don't know if they're still offering that service, but there are plenty that will kind of take you from one to the other. You park in one central location and they'll take you. You just have to kind of do a little digging or ask, send them a message and ask. So that scope and coverage, like I talked about, is really, really important. Because if there's a gap in the coverage, what are you going to do, right? If there was a fire that destroyed a probate records, or if there was a water leak or a flood that destroyed a portion of land records, you need to know whether or not that affected the years and the types of records you're looking to access. Again, like I was saying about, are these records located in a different place? So sometimes that is true. So if the records you're looking for a probate are damaged or destroyed in that county, sometimes you can get lucky enough that those records still exist in another county as well. For probate, for example, if I owned real estate in more than one location, a copy of my will and probate needs to be filed in each of those places. So if I own land in Kendall County and yet I own maybe a summer home in Colorado, or I own property in Will County, a copy of that estate needs to be filed in both locations. So sometimes you can get around records that are missing or damaged in one location by seeing if they're available someplace else. Sometimes records are filed in duplicate or triplicate. So, like when you think about Chicago and you think about the Great Chicago Fire, land records survived in a lot of instances because duplicate copies were sent to the state. So sometimes you can find land deeds pre-1871 because there are copies that still exist on the state level. So sometimes you can get lucky that there's redundancy there. Or sometimes with birth and death certificates, you would have a city clerk who would then submit those records to the state or to the county clerk. And if the county clerk has a disaster, the city clerk might still have copies. So sometimes you can find a little bit of overlap. And shop around, right? See what the price is. So, for example, if they tell me the turnaround time is going to be a month, right? If it's a record that might exist as a duplicate, I can reach out to one of those other agencies and ask, how long is it going to take to get a copy of this? Also, how much is it going to cost? Think about the IRAD. I'm going to talk about IRAD in a little bit later on. If I go to Will County and I need a death certificate, and Will County tells me it's going to be $20, but the IRAD system has it and it's going to be 50 cents, you can bet I'm absolutely going to the IRAD to get a copy of that document. It might not be certified, right? It might not have the seal on it. That's okay. For most of us, that's not a problem. And then again, like I said, see if you can bring your electronic device, because that's going to save you time and money because you're going home with that document today. So let's talk about academic archives and special collections. There's a difference between those two terms, but both can be extremely useful to you in the research that you're doing. So university archives, they maintain the records and the documents related to the institution, right? That's going to be teachers, that's going to be professional staff, everything from janitors to maybe the bus driver who runs the shuttle. That's going to include students, but it's also going to include life within the community. So, for example, right, if I had somebody that went to Aurora University, which you can hear my cat meowing, you can hear Angus in there trying to get in. Um, they are a university, yes, first and foremost, but they're also based on a religious entity, right? They're an evangelical university. So they have a lot of religious records in here as well. And not just religious records for students who attended Aurora University, but religious records for their religion across the country. It They're also going to collect information about the community as well. So they're going to have maps, they're going to have newspapers, they're going to have photographs, not just of students in and around town, but of town itself. So yeah, you can look for student records, you can look for professorial records. Yearbooks are kind of one of those standard things that they have. But not only would they have school newspapers, but they would have community and local newspapers as well. Not only would they have staff directories, but they would have community phone books and directories as well. So you want to kind of look and see if you had a university in town near where your family was living to see if they wind up represented within these university archives because they lived close enough that the university has old newspapers or it has photographs of events. Think about things like parades and anniversaries and things like that, where members of the university would be out within the community, right? So they're taking pictures of parades. They're taking pictures of Christmases with Santa. They're taking pictures of, 100th anniversaries of City Hall, those kinds of things. So they have those types of records within their collections as well. And then they have what they call their special collections. So these are collections that support the curriculum of the university. So, for example, one of my absolute favorites is Cornell University has a witches and witchcraft special collections where they have records relating to witchcraft trials all across the globe. It is not just in like the Eastern Seaboard within the United States. And you would think it's weird that Cornell would have records and transcripts of witchcraft trials in Germany, but they do because they're related to the curriculum for the university. So, like University of Michigan has a huge collection of transportation within their archives. They have an archive, transportation archives, and that's everything from, shipbuilding to railroads to Lincoln Highway to Route 66, anything having to do with transportation, because it goes along with the curriculum that the professors are teaching. So you just have to look for these. So I went to ISU, go Redbirds. And ISU, Illinois State University, has what's called their Circus and Allied Arts collection up on the sixth floor of Milner Library. And Circus and Allied Arts would be more than just Barnum and Bailey, right? It included vaudeville, it included stand-up comics, it included early silent films, because those were all allied arts. So we have this huge collection of things at ISU, right, in normal related to these types of collections. So whether it's advertising like North Carolina has, or whether it's Harvard's Women's Diaries collections, University of Illinois Chicago has a collection of indentures for indentured servants that are digitized and available through University of Chicago. So sometimes you can find these really cool special collections that are in a place you wouldn't think to look because it goes along with their curriculum. So just some examples of places. How can I find these? How do I even know that University of Michigan has a transportation collection? And you look through some of these university finding aids, these university databases. In Illinois, we have Carly, which is the consortium of academic and research libraries in Illinois. Absolutely adore Carly. I'm going to show you an example of what Carly looks like in just a second. But to give you an example, Monmouth College, Presbyterian University in Illinois, not only do they have records pertaining to Presbyterian ministers and Presbyterian life, they also have a collection of Navy flight school records that for the Naval Training Base, Naval Pilots School near Monmouth. One, Monmouth is nowhere near water, so why would the Navy be using that Rantoul, I think it is, as a training center? Because it was convenient to train pilots. So they have a collection and it shows up in Carly. So using things like that can help you find what was once unknown or undiscoverable. Chicago Collections Consortium does the same thing. It's made up of Chicagoland area research institutions. So not just University of Illinois at Chicago, but things like the Art Institute in the Field Museum, Northwestern, DePaul, Loyola, all have collections represented in Chicago Collections Consortium. Now, these aren't digitized, right? I'm not necessarily looking at original digitized sources, but it is made up of finding aids and collection databases to allow me to find out what they have. So, for example, University of Illinois at Chicago has an enormous collection of not only social justice, but give me a second, I'm having a menopausal moment. Not sociology, aid society records, right? So orphanages, day orphanages, um, assistance, like think of Jane Addams, right? Jane Addams Hull House, right? They have a lot of those types of community resource records already within University of Illinois at Chicago's website, and they're discoverable through the CCC, through the Chicago Collections Consortium. I gave you just a few other examples in there. Like I said, Harvard Special Collections, they have those diaries. They also have a collection of slavery sales and indenture records, just like I said, Illinois has as well. So there's some fantastic collections out there. Here's an example of Carly. This is what the homepage looks like. You can search and browse by the universities within Illinois that have collections. You could browse by topic. You can look by The type of media, am I looking at photographs, documents, AV materials? And you could just do a keyword search. So depending on what you're looking for, you could just go in there and search for it. So if I was doing Swedish research, there's a huge collection of Augustana's Swedish records available in there, Vasa's in there. Like I said, the Naval Pilot School records, some of those are in there. And then, like Governor State University has a series of tax tax assessor's records for the 1870s and 1880s in Will County for Monee. Somehow somebody found them and donated them to Governor State University. So my McDonald family is represented in these tax records that Governor State digitized and put into Carly from the 1870s through the 1880s. I can see year by year by year John McDonald and his family listed in these tax records because somebody gave them to a university and they were digitized. Some other cool things in here, though, right? You could just do a search on their map collections or on a specific name. The Ayers collection is partially digitized and available in here through the Newberry Library. You'll find things like the Chicago Genealogical Society's quarterlies are in here. The McDonough County Genealogical Society's quarterly called The Stalker, which is, I think, the best name ever for a genealogical society newsletter. Those are available in here. So universities have a lot of genealogy in them that people just don't always think to associate with university collections. So let's talk about corporate archives. I'm just going to kind of breeze through this because sometimes they're not always easily accessible, but what they have in them can be incredibly useful. Every corporate archives kind of mandates how long they are going to include personnel records. So sometimes you'll be able to find them, not always. Sometimes they're destroyed after 40 to 50 years. It just depends on the institution. But you might be lucky enough to find things like personnel records or cards saying how long somebody was employed, what their job was. Sometimes there's a photo. Absolutely, you're going to be able to find any type of internal communications, whether that's company newsletters to their employees, whether that's outward magazines and publications that they made available to the public. Those are going to be accessible through corporate archives. And then things about what they did, right? What did they make? What did they build? So things like product, R&D files and designs, patents, photographs of facilities or objects. So like John Deere, right, has an extension collection of photographs of John Deere tractors because that's what they build. But they also have like the plans and the specs and the schematics of those. They'll have information about any of their facilities. So, for example, my grandpa used to work for Campbell's Soup on the south side of Chicago. Campbell's has an archives in New Jersey. It's closed to the public, but you can submit requests. But they put out a newsletter and you could request access to those newsletters, right? They also had information about all of their facilities, their factories, and their plants. Where were they? What was going on in those? Sometimes you can find photographs, like if they were to inaugurate a new facility or a new line, right? They would be special event photographs that might be accessible to you as well. So lots of different things that corporate archives have to offer, right? Or even if it's just information about when they were started, what type of industry did they do, right? Sometimes it might not be personnel related specifically, but can fill in some gaps into your family history about why they were in a particular place at a particular time, right? So, Atchison, Topeka, Santa Fe, spare you, I'm not going to sing the song, but they had a company newsletter, and a lot of these are digitized and are available through Internet Archive, where not only are they talking about staff, like here's an example, here's our September birthdays, right? They're talking about their kids, they're talking about, family, wives having babies and sons and daughters graduating from college in a national newsletter for a very large corporation. And so you could find some of these. Here's the one for my grandpa. Campbell Soup had a policy as soon as you turned 65, they retired you on your 65th birthday. My grandpa was no exception to that. But they also wrote a nice little article, full page article about him in the Campbell Soup Company newsletter because he was a ham radio operator. So they talk about, his ham radio. They talk about what his handle is. So you could see what his handle is in there, how many people he's talked to around the globe. I think it even mentions my mom and her sisters in there. Really personal stuff. that you can find in these documents. So not all corporations have their own archives. There's a really nice list I give you here through the um, American Archivists, which is an organization I belong to. And some of them have already donated those collections to universities. So whether it's Harvard's Business School collection has a huge archives of business records, or whether they've been donated to a local historical society or to a state or to a museum, right? You just need to dig a little deeper. So for example, Henry Ford, right? They've been donated to the museum complex and they reside in Dearborn, Michigan. Kodak archives, I think, are going to be moved before long. They've been moved to the University of Rochester because Kodak finally closed their corporate headquarters and their archives, and they've moved those records to a local university. So sometimes you can find these available to you publicly through other avenues. So, like I said, what about digital archives and resources, or digital archive resources, I should say? A couple of my favorites, Internet Archive is an amazing resource, and I highly recommend everybody use Internet Archive if you haven't already. But then Archive Grid is another one of my favorites. So I'm going to talk about Archive Grid in more detail in just a second, because it's a resource that I use to help me find the unimaginable. What did I not even know existed? And then tell me where I can find it. But these archives are for, like I said, those two types of media. They're for those things that are digitized that were a physical format, and they're for those things that are born digital. So that would be things like movies, sound recordings, videos, where there's no physical object for it. This was just streaming, or like these Zoom recordings like now, where there's no physical object to this. So you want to make sure, right, that you're accessing these types of materials as well. So think about like newspaper databases, right? You go to newspapers.com, you go to, newspaper archive, right? These are digital archives of print materials, but then there are plenty of other resources where think about broadcast news, right? There's not necessarily a physical object associated with broadcast news anymore. Everything's recorded digitally. Things like Twitter, right? That is strictly a digital media. And places like the Library of Congress, and you might not know this, originally when Twitter started, the Library of Congress was archiving every tweet that was produced through Twitter up to a point. Well, now there's so many people on Twitter, they just select and only archive the tweets of famous people. Some are way more prolific than others, but they save certain tweets that they feel are important for the historical record. These are strictly digital, right? In the Library of Congress, which we know of as an institution that houses physical documents, also keeps these types of records as well. And they store these offsite in Northern Virginia. But they do have an index online, so you can go and search the Twitter archive by topic or by person and see if you're in there, if you were an early adapter of Twitter. Here's just some examples of places that have what would be considered digital archives. That includes Boston Public Library, that includes Digital Public Library of America, that would include things like the New York Public Library's digital collections. But then strictly born digital material would be Media Burn, Media Archive on the north side of Chicago. That would be things like, I love this link, the Killer Digital Libraries and Archives. Again, these are strictly digital. There's no physical object associated with this. So they kind of range across both spectrums, the archives, plural, physical objects, and archive being strictly digital. But Archive Grid is one that I want to talk about because I think it's really important. Archive Grid I use weekly, and I use Archive Grid as a way of discovering the undiscoverable. So if I'm researching a topic, whether it's vaudeville, whether it's railroad records, whether it's the 313th engineers, I can go into Archive Grid. I can either browse collections that are around me. So you can see in Chicago and in Illinois, we have a lot of various archives that are accessible to us. Things like the Brookfield Zoo has an archives, right? Augustana College, Aurora University, there's a lot of archives available to us. So I can browse. I want to see what Brookfield Zoo has. I want to see what Rockford Public Library has, and I can do that. Or I can put in a topic. So I can say I'm looking for vaudeville, and it's going to show me all of the places that have manuscript collections related to vaudeville across the US. Some of these are international, so you can find some overseas, you can find some in Canada, Mexico, largely US, and it's going to show me what exists. And it breaks it down into categories. So I did a search on Danville, Illinois. Somebody had asked me, they were looking for family records. So I just went in literally and put in a search. What exists for the community of Danville, Illinois? It gives me individual people. It tells me where these places are, right? What archives have records about Danville? Illinois State Archives, Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library, but University of Kentucky, Ball State University, right? University of Indiana, right? And then where are these locations? Muncie, Indiana, Washington, D.C. So, these things live outside of just Illinois. And what types of records exist? We've got military bounties, public land sales, right? The buying and selling of property, all kinds of publications and birth records and all of these different things that mention Danville, Illinois. And you can go in and you can click on any of these, and it's going to kind of show you the finding aid to that institution. If it's a huge institution, sometimes it might be a little bit more difficult. If it's smaller institutions, sometimes then it becomes a little easier to kind of search through the finding aids to find what you're looking for. But specifically, I clicked on military bounties. It tells me there's 45 or 47 different collections that have information about military service, land bounties, that reference somebody who served and lived in Danville within these collections. So I can click on this one, United States General Land Office, right? These are records in Washington, D.C. I can view that catalog record and it tells me what is available. Gives me a little bit of history about it. Tells me that there's 3 ledgers that are available through the state archives related to land purchases in and around Danville, Illinois. And then what I love even more is it says, oh, well, if you're looking for this, how about you look at these? And then it gives me other recommendations, right? So, well, there's monthly accounts records, there's quarterly accounts, right? There's receivers' quarterly accounts. So, for example, if I went in, I did a search on George K. Middleton. That's my great grandfather, had served in the Civil War, had been in Company K of the Wisconsin 18th Infantry. I can search on Wisconsin 18th Infantry and see where records come up. I can go in and search on George K. Middleton. And when I did that, it brought me to a family newsletter for the Hendershot family. So George's first wife, he and his first wife had 5 children. They separated, never divorced, and he married a second woman and had my grandfather and his sister, my great Aunt Evie. So a bigamist, you know. The second marriage was not legit. Um, but his daughter from that first marriage went on to marry a man by the name of Hendershot. And my great grandfather is listed in the Hendershot family newsletter because they're talking about um, him in his Civil War service in that family's newsletter. I didn't even know there was a Hendershot family newsletter, but I was able to find it through Archive Grid. So again, it's those things where it helps me know what I didn't know, and it's one of my favorite resources. So yes, it's a digital archive. I highly recommend it for digging into physical archives, regardless of the subject. Okay, so let's kind of breeze through federal archives because we're pretty familiar with this process. So accessing things, whether it's the U.S. federal archives, whether it's, the Canadian archives in Ottawa, whether it's the National Records Service in Scotland and Edinburgh, they're going to have records related to the nation. Right, so that's going to include more than just military service. That's going to include land records. That's going to include census information. That's going to include things like Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service, right, Department of Defense. All of those types of government agency records are going to be there. But then there's going to be information on individual citizens as well. So, like I said, military records, right? You join the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. That's going to include naturalization records. Somebody takes the time to become a U.S. citizen. That's going to include things like FBI case files, right? So mafia wars and drug trafficking and racketeering. Those types of records, those criminal records are going to be accessible on the federal level for federal crimes. Somebody transports alcohol during the Prohibition from Illinois into Wisconsin. You cross state lines, that becomes a federal crime. Or you rob a train, right? That train is traveling across state lines. Those are federal crimes. Those types of records are available through the National Archives. Things like trademark infringements, right? So Walt Disney sued everybody all the time for infringing on, the patent that he had for Mickey Mouse. That's things like Kellogg suing from people for companies who were using a lookalike for Tony the Tiger, right? Trademark infringement records are associated with the National Archives as well. And these records are available and they're kept permanently in a lot of cases because they have what's called a strict records retention schedule. So National Archive system works on a set series of timestamps. So federal agencies are responsible for keeping the records for 10 years on site. After 10 years, they don't go to the archives, they go to a records management facility. That could be anywhere from 10 years to 50 years, depending on the statute. And then a certain percentage of those are then moved to the archives to be kept indefinitely as deemed important for state congruency, for national records access. So the three main hubs when we think about federal records are Archives One in Washington, D.C. It's where the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence live. Archives Two in College Park, Maryland, which is where their map collections live, a portion of their audiovisual collections live, a lot of their military records, their photograph division is here. And then NPRC, which is their personnel record center in St. Louis. Now, they have archives scattered all over the United States, representing 12 different areas of the country. In Chicago, we have Great Lakes. In Atlanta, representing the Southeast, they would have records, all of the military records, the draft cards. That's the word I'm looking for. All the draft cards for the entire United States are in Atlanta. All of bankruptcy records, because bankruptcy is federal, all of the bankruptcy records that have been saved are in Kansas City. So there's certain hubs elsewhere that keep all of the records for a certain topic. But these three are the most well known as being the hubs. So National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis keeps all of the military personnel records. So you are working for the Army or the Navy or the Coast Guard. You are working for National Park Service, or you're a census taker, or you're a postman, you're a postmaster. Those records are in St. Louis. It's not an easy concept. Things get shifted around from time to time, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb. So in Illinois, we collect the records for the seven states surrounding Illinois. So we have everything from Ohio to Minnesota, Illinois, small, tiny portion of Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those records, federal records, are here in Chicago. So that would include federal trademark cases. Walt Disney was based out of Chicago, so those records are here. That would include things about military bases or Native American tribes within those seven states. So, things like the Menominee in Wisconsin, those records are in Chicago, and those are accessible. So that's how the regional archives kind of break down. Anybody is allowed to go and visit one of the archives facilities. The exception is NPRC in St. Louis. If you're requesting personnel records, you have to request them in advance, and they will give you a date, or they will tell you when your records are available so you can come down and look at them. Any other of the facilities, you can walk in the door and ask to access records, whether that's here in Chicago, whether that's DC, whether that's College Park, you can then ask for those records. Just like I talked about at the beginning, these records are broken down into record groups. So the Indian Agency, Indian Affairs records are record group 15. If I'm looking for criminal court records, that's record group 21. If I'm looking for Adjutant General's records, for Army records, for stateside records, that's record group 397, right? That they have their overarching, here's my record group. If you want to kind of get an idea, if you want to play around, you can look at the archives website. You can go out to archives.gov and take a look at the catalog and see where records exist. If you want to look specifically at what Great Lakes collects and you want to see what their record group numbering system is, in your handout you have this link. So you can kind of click on that and it shows you how the record groups break down. They have a lot of really cool stuff. So here's just kind of some examples of the types of things they have. We're familiar with census records. We use them all the time. The Federal Archives is the repository that handles all of the federal censuses from 1790 all the way up to the present. So while these are digitized and available through third-party resources, Family Search, Ancestry, Find My Past, those records originate and live at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. But things like homestead records, here's an example of a homestead. This is one of my ancestors, William J. Muir, who had applied for a homestead at far western Nebraska in Dunphy, close to Colorado. Here's a copy of that homestead record. That is available at Archives One in Washington, D.C. as well, with the rest of their land groups. Military Signal Corps photos within the photographic collections at the National Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. They have a full range of photos that were taken during the First and Second War that were done by the Signal Corps. And I love this photo because specifically with Signal Corps of Engineer records, every single person is listed. So on the back side of this photo, every single one of these men is listed on the back of this photo. Is it discoverable by individual soldier? No, because their finding aid only goes down to the unit, but I would be able to discover that photos existed by this for this unit if I knew the unit that I was searching for. So it might not come down to the individuals, but if I knew that they were in the 313th Engineers, here we go. Here's a fantastic photo that's within their collections. What I love about the National Archives is that they have been working diligently since COVID, so since 2020, to digitize records within their catalog and make them accessible online for free directly through the National Archives website. So yes, they are partnered with Ancestry to make naturalization papers available. They are contracted with Fold 3 to make military records accessible. You don't necessarily have to pay these third parties for access. You can now do that research directly through the National Archives catalog. So if I go to their catalog, if I go to research our records, and I put in the name and the service number of the person I'm looking for, if those records have been digitized, they're going to show up here for me. So for example, they just finished digitizing Second World War monthly rosters and reports. So if I were looking for my Grandpa Casey in the Navy, I could put in Tatara and his service number, and it's going to tell me if those records have been uploaded into the catalog already. And if so, I just have to click on that record. And I might have to page through because it's going to tell me you've got, so like my grandpa's name, last name is Tatara. It might tell me that they have records Tate to Tarowski, right? And I could, okay, he's going to be within this alphabetically, and then I can go through those records. But they're already digitizing them and putting them directly into their own catalog. If I want to dig a little deeper, I can do that. They do have resources for genealogists. They do have resources if you're doing military history. So I can access specific databases and collections that are accessible finding aids, so to speak, to dig deeper into the National Archives catalog. One of those finding aids would be the AAD, um, um, which they break it down into categories. So if I had somebody who was a prisoner of war during the Second World War, I could search that database and it would give me his service number and where he was detained. I can use it to search for Army enlistments during the Second World War. I can search for Cold War case files through that database. There's a lot of different categories in there. But the AAD is, again, just one of those resources, one of those two. I should have lowered the circle down a little bit. You'll see it'll say access to archival databases. It's one of those that I can search, use that finding aid to then look in that keyword search in the catalog to see if those records are accessible. And if they're not, then I know I can reach out to them and I can get access to them by contacting them directly. So here's that AAD that I mentioned. A lot of really good collections are accessible in there. But don't just think of it as I need to be specific and I need to have a specific name and a specific Service number. Remember, not everything is cataloged down to that level, even at the National Archives. Sometimes I just have to search and see what I come up with. So I did a search. I was looking for Illinois post offices or Illinois postmasters. So I just put in Illinois and post to see what would come up. And you can see I had received 1,300 results. Some of them, there's an actual digital image associated with it or a document associated with it. So I can click on that available online and it's going to show me everything that's already been digitized. Um, Across the left-hand side, it's going to tell me where it is. So if I were to scroll down, I would see which facility. Is it at Great Lakes? Is it in Atlanta? Is it at the National Archives in San Francisco? It's going to show me. It's going to show me the record group number and the record series number. So then I could take that and then search more. Well, what else is in this record series? Maybe there's something else that's useful to me. And like I said, you want to use that hierarchy to your advantage because there might be subject terms or record groups or series that you didn't know existed, and it'll help you dig deeper into their catalog. There's billions of pages of records in here, so you're not always necessarily going to be able to find what you're looking for. It's very easy to get lost. But sometimes you find some really good stuff. So because I was looking for post offices, I got something completely different. I got Illinois mentioned in the Washington Post. Okay, Illinois and Post. And here's a cartoon representing Senator William Mason that was posted in the Washington Post in 1931. So sometimes you can find some fun stuff in there too. Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library is a standalone entity. So it kind of represents two different types of archives. Federally, because it has federal records related to um, all but one president. They've got 46 out of 47, I should say 45 out of 47 presidents represented within the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library collection. They represent all 50 states as well as territories. So they are federal in nature, but they're run by an independent agency. So they're not part of the National Park Service presidential library system. They are run by an elected board. They are a private non-for-profit, but there is a lot of overlap. So I wanted to include them in here because not only do they have federal records related to Abraham Lincoln and other presidents, they also have state records because Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library was originally the Illinois State Historical Library that used to be in the basement of the state. Um, the You know what I mean. So that library, they merged those two libraries together to create the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. So that's why there's so many records related to all 50 states. It's because it was a state historical library. They have a fantastic genealogy collection, there's no doubt. If you've been into the research room, they have records for all 102 counties, but they have fantastic manuscripts collections as well. So whether it's individual state governors, whether it's individual presidents like Abraham Lincoln, letters written to and from, correspondences to people, they also have a really large Civil War diary collection and Civil War letters collection that's worth taking the time to investigate. They also have a statewide newspaper collection. And while they no longer lend through interlibrary loan, they do have a nice finding aid. They do have an obit index on their website that you would have access to. And as part of the Illinois newspaper project with University of Illinois in Champaign, you can find those newspapers and then request those through U of I. So let's talk about museums and society archives. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're familiar with these. Even Chicago Scots, right? All of that work that Wayne did to build the museum and build the society's collections. This is what Bess does. I'm going to give her a wink because I love coming in to help organize the library collections. You're an organization, you're a society archives and museum, and those collections are accessible to the public. Now, when I looked recently, I used to have access to the finding aid for the Chicago Scots Museum collections through Past Perfect. I couldn't find them anymore. My link was broken. So if they're no longer online at the end, best let me know. But Wayne used to have the catalog accessible online, just like anybody else, whether it's Plainfield Historical Society, whether it's Chicago Historical Society, right? Chicago History Museum. These collections are searchable and accessible to an extent online. just some examples, right? City directories, newspapers, photographs. Chicago History Museum has a really cool neighborhood collection where you can search by individual streets. So if you're searching for Western Avenue or if you're searching for La Crosse, right, they've got an index by address of all of the information they have on those particular streets. Sometimes, like LaGrange Historical Society has dozens of file cabinets where they have a dossier. They have a folder on each and every address within their city boundary. So if I'm researching a house on 44th Street, they can go and pull everything that they have, whether it's newspaper articles, photographs, postcards, whatever it happens to be. So it depends on the size of the collection and the size of the volunteers, what type of information they have. But there's some fantastic things that you can use to your advantage. We're pretty familiar with these. Some places I want you to think about outside of your traditional Chicago History Museum, Naperville Settlement. Smithsonian, just like the Library of Congress, is a people's repository. So you are going to find everyday um, citizens, everyday residents in the United States showing up in both Library of Congress and the Smithsonian's collections. Daughters of the American Revolution has a fantastic collection that includes, not just Revolutionary era ancestors, but all the way up to the present through their databases and their application process. Some really great stuff that exists out there. All right, I'm going to tell you all about my trip to Philadelphia, but we're going to get to that in just a second. Religious archives have a narrow scope in the fact that they're only collecting documents related to that denomination, but that denomination could be global, it could be all of the US, or it could be just for a specific location. So it's worth digging into these collections because it's going to represent a lot of people. So not just that kind of organizational structure, right, where they have information on the hierarchy, right, whether it's an archdiocese, whether it's, Presbyterian, whether we're talking about presbyteries or Methodist synods, right? Not just the organization, but then all of those member churches and individual members that reside within it. So things about missions, right? So if they had missions that went to China, if they had missions that went, to Mexico, those records are going to be in there. It's going to include things like subscription lists, if they're renting pews or if they're helping to build a new facility, right? They would subscribe and donate money to build that church. Those records are in there. I can't even tell you the, we know how it is when you're dealing with Presbyterians, when you're dealing with meeting minutes, when you're dealing with any of those kind of minutes where, so and so is accusing somebody else of slander because they called him a drunk, or, women who were hauled before the church because they were starting to show that they were pregnant out of wedlock. Those records are absolutely amazing. You want to use those in your research. But then things like school records, right? A lot of, especially Presbyterian schools or Catholic schools or Baptist schools or, Amish schools would have records about individual teachers and students. So you want to try to look for these types of things to use in your research. Every denomination has a national archives. For the interesting thing is the Evangelical Lutheran Archives for the United States is here in Elk Grove Village. But like Chicago Catholic Archives, right? When we're dealing with the Chicago Archdiocese, it's huge. Or if you think about the Joliet Diocese, stretches from Kankakee, all the way up into the northern suburbs. These dioceses are enormous, and they have a lot of information in them. Presbyterian Historical Society, right? Or like the United Methodist Church records are at Garrett in the Garrett archives at Northwestern, right? Those are if you had somebody who was a Methodist, they have records not only about ministers in churches, but individual church sacramental records and things like that. Some absolute amazing stuff. But I want to talk about my trip because I spent an entire day at the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, which has records for the Presbyterian, USA, right? It's not the Reformed Church. We're not talking about Covenanters. That archives is in South Carolina. Although they do have a lot of overlap. They do have some covenanting, some Reformed Church records here. It's predominantly, USA, Presbyterian, the Main Street Presbyterian Church records that are here. Their collection underground stretches for an entire city block. It is enormous. And it's all compact shelving. So like There's a lot of records in here. You just have to make an appointment. It's open to the public. Anybody can go in and look through their collections. They have a research room where they have books on the shelves. I highly recommend looking for these church archives books because they're done by state. So it's a WPA project. So some of these show up in Internet Archive and Hathi Trust, not all of them, but some of them do. And it breaks down by state what types of church records were inventoried by the WPA. So I found a couple of the churches for the families that I was researching. I did not find them for my churches here in Illinois. But if your family came east to west, you might get lucky enough. They've got sacramental records and minute books. You can see this is Fishing Creek Congregation. This is pre-Revolutionary War. These books start in 1766 when the church was established, all the way up past the Civil War. You can see here's just an image of a shelf. You can see all of the books and the call numbers that they have for church session minutes and sacramental records. There's some amazing stuff that they have within this collection. It's a national book, National Archives, but again, representing all 50 states. Here's just a couple more examples. Here's one for an inventory of covenanting churches in Pennsylvania. So it breaks it down what types of records exist and who's represented in this bibliography. And then this is another reformed set of church records for one of my families that were in Thompsonville, Connecticut, before they came to Tamarack, before they came to Wheatland. And again, all of their membership statuses are represented in here. And it will tell you, did they profess, did they enter by letter? If they left the church and went someplace else, that second page would tell me where they went or if they died. These are amazing, absolutely amazing. And they're accessible to us. You just have to visit. Then I'm going to finish with state and municipal archives. Again, we're going to kind of breeze through some of these because we've used the state archives in the past, but they have made substantial changes. And I want to point that out, that the state, if you have not been to the Secretary of State's website recently, they have made some pretty big changes. But state and municipal archives are going to have things related to the state. They're not necessarily going to be focusing on federal records. So they're going to be talking about state land records, state militias and National Guard units, state taxes that are being paid, vital records, births, marriages, and deaths, court cases that are like county and district court cases, not federal cases. So these aren't cases that are going to cross state lines. These are things like theft, murder, right? Those things that are happening, within the state. They're going to have copies of those citizenship and naturalization records because if they were filed locally before 1920, right, they're going to be listed on the individual county level. So there's still a lot of personal family information accessible. Now, the smallest unit of government in Illinois is the township. Township records aren't necessarily digitized and accessible online. Sometimes you can get lucky that they're available. Like we digitized Wheatland Township records that are available through IDA, Illinois. I mentioned Moni is already digitized through Carly, through Governor State University. But a lot of times you have to just reach out to the township and take a look at these. They're going to have things like Justice of the Peace records, squabbles over fence lines and things like that. And chattel mortgages, which are amazing. Basically, you would borrow money from the richest guy in town. You would put up collateral until you could pay the money back. Kind of shows you how wealthy or not wealthy families were if they kept borrowing money, and putting up collateral. So you could see how, the cows and the steers and the heifers that this person was using as collateral in order to borrow money on a term, usually, 18 months to 3 years. These are the types of things that townships and counties will have accessible to you. So while Will County is the only county out of 102 in the state of Illinois that has its own archives, everything else resides within the Illinois State Archives through the IRAD system. So like I said, they have made changes to their website. So you would still be able to access these types of documents. You're just kind of dig in a different kind of way now. So if you've gone to the Secretary of State's website, we used to be under departments and then state archives. Now you have to go to more services. So if you haven't looked in a while, it looks different. You click on more services, you would see the state library and the state archives listed there. and you would click on the state archives. Before, you used to have a whole lot of text at the top of it and then the list of databases at the bottom. They've updated that page now so that if I want to get straight to the digital, the databases, right, I can click on that link and it shows me the records we used to access, the Civil War muster rolls, the death records, the um, em- uh, indentured servants records, land records, stuff like that. So I can still get to those databases here. They've added a little link to genealogy research. There's not a whole lot in there just yet. Some of those forms and publications we used to have access to before. And then explore our holdings. This is where I would go to dig into and search those record groups and record subject series within the state archives. These aren't the databases where I can search by every name. This takes me directly into the state's archives catalog. Before, you used to have to go to library host. It's now a completely different link. That link doesn't work anymore. And then digital collections, they do have some stuff digitized. Um, we're going to focus just for right now on exploring our holdings. So this is where I'm going to go in and I'm going to search those record groups. So you can see it looks a lot different than it used to look when it was library host. Um, I can still search by a keyword search. So I can search on taxes. I can search on school. I can search on insane, right? Because there's the insane asylum records that the state carries. I could search on any of those terms. I can search by specific agencies. If I'm looking for state treasurer records, or if I'm looking for land offices, I can still search by specific creator. I could just browse by subject, right? I could put in influenza and see what records come up for the 1918 pandemic. Any way you want to search, you can search that way. You can search by individual record group too. So I could put in RG37 and it would take me right to that record collection. But if I just do a search on tax, it's going to bring up a whole lot of records off to the side. I kind of scrolled down a little bit to kind of show you the types of things they have. I can see that I've got assessment of real property. I can see that they have correspondence files between the state tax commission and the counties, township receipts and expenditures. So this particular one is if I had somebody who was employed by the township, right? Let's say they were a garbage collector or dog catcher, right? They're going to show up in these records. The beauty of these are a little late, but in the 20th century, early 20th century and 19th century, everybody who lived in a township, especially Wheatland Township, was expected to give 1 day of service. They would pay you, but you would have to, as a man, you would have to agree to do 1 day of work, whether that's grading and repairing roads, whether that's pulling weeds, whether that's repairing fences, and 1 day a year, you would get paid, but you were giving back to the community. These show up in these records. So if you know you had somebody lived in DuPage Township or lived in Wheatland Township, you could go through these books if you can find them. Some have been donated to the state, some still live in the township records, and find them listed in these. So it's just the kind of thing that you wouldn't normally think to look for, but still really valuable to your research. And those are under that collection search link now right on the homepage. I mentioned IRAD's facilities. IRAD facilities are broken up into 7 different locations around the state. They're all in universities. So, ISU, NIU, SIU, Eastern, Western, each one of these houses records collections that are associated with the townships, the counties that surround them. So you can see that on the map here. So for us, we're looking at NIU or NEIU. If you're downstate, you're looking at SIU. And each one of those facilities will have records related to those counties, like I showed, tax records, probate records, military records, vital records, whatever it is, they would have them on microfilm, sometimes the original documents. NEIU has the original intake books for Cook County Hospital up to, I think, 1938. So I can look at those original intake books from the pandemic, right, and see all the people who went to Cook County Hospital in 1918 and 1919. Some things are physical, like ISU has original probate records from McLean County and Logan County and Livingston County. Most of the time they're on microfilm. but I can search the database, and I do give you the link in your handout, so you don't need to copy it down. But they do have a government records index search that you can do, whether it's military, whether it's probate, whether it's birth records, school records. I just did a search on school, and you could see all of the types of records that exist for school records through IRAD. And the length, some of these are pretty substantial. School teachers' daily registers, those books that the teachers kept to their students for Hardin County from 1882 to 1905. That's generational. That's probably two generations of family listed in those records. Some of them are even bigger. Johnson County has um, student school district records from 1860 to 1951. Really lengthy period of time. School schedules, you could see those here for Will County. This is for Frankfurt school districts. So, go in and dig around and see what kind of records the IRADs might have for the topics you're searching for on your family. I think you'll be surprised. And then just lastly, some other places, other types of places to look. Like I said, bigger cities usually will have their own municipal archives. Champaign County has one. Chicago has one. If you're looking just to kind of see what exists out there, the National Archives has a nice little list of state archives and repositories for you to use. If we look outside of Illinois, New York City has their own archives, Philadelphia has their own city archives, and then if we're doing Scottish research, Glasgow, Edinburgh each have their own municipal archives that are separate from what the nation, what the county or what the province has as well. So I follow Edinburgh City Archives on Facebook. They've just moved into a gorgeous new facility. They've been working on it for well over a year. Follow them on social media, whatever type of social media you're on, because they really have a truly amazing collection. Everything from building plans to photographs to toll booth records for people who were incarcerated. They have some pretty amazing stuff. Okay, so I am going to make my screen bigger so I can see all of your smiling faces. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then, Bess, now I'm going to put you on the spot and I'm going to ask that question. Do we still have access online to Past Perfect? Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you. Hold on. You got to unmute yourself. I didn't hear what you said, Beth.
Okay,
There you
there
go.
we go. I don't know. I did not know that was even out there. How's that for ignorant? So I will be doing some inquiries.
Yeah, because Wayne did an amazing job of getting all that stuff uploaded into the collection. So I hope
Yeah.
it's still accessible out there somewhere.
I hope so. I know we've got records that we did for some of the old membership and some of the old home residents and also some of the burials at Roseland. But those are all just on a CD because we were told that we can't make them publicly accessible because of
Um,
privacy laws.
that part makes sense. Although the funeral, the Roseland records maybe, but I
Yeah,
could see not having the home records available.
yeah. But so yeah, I have it noted and will be following up on that. Thank you for
All
letting me
right.
know it was even out there.
Yeah. All right. So any archive I mentioned that you guys hadn't thought, oh, I should use that.
Oh yeah, the corporate archives because my dad was worked for UOP for years, and I know there's at least one corporate newsletter that's got when they opened a new facility, that's not only a picture of him, but my
Mhm.
sisters.
I'm glad to hear that. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, well, let me see what else UOP has to say about Daddy.
Oh yeah, I bet you they probably got something.
Yeah, I would.
Okay, so I think it was did Lynn, I think Lynn just asked about the handout. All right, let me see if I can upload it into the chat.
Perfect.
I
Okay,
am not
yeah.
always 100% tech savvy, so
It,
we're gonna see.
Thanks for
I thought
asking
I
that, Lynn.
included
I
it
was
with email.
wondering about that too.
Oh, okay. I thought I included that with the email with the link, but I can send it out again.
Oh, let me look.
And let's see if I can do this. So if
Oh,
you
yes.
find it
Oh, no,
before I
no,
did. Nope.
it's not.
No,
No,
okay,
just
then I
the
will.
calendar invite is attached.
All right. I will send it out again to everybody.
Yes. Still trying to figure out how to get this uploaded to you. Hmm. See all of my emails back and forth the best. All right. Nope. You're right. It wasn't in that email.
All
It
right.
wasn't. I
So,
am so
so
sorry.
in the chat, in the bottom, there's a little file icon.
All right. Let's try this. We're going to make this work. I mean, sometimes it works. Sometimes it tells me, oh, no, you need to go to like Dropbox. It's like, what? All right. Here we go. Chat.
Oh, what is it saying?
Oh, no. Do I? Oh, hold on. Nope. Hide chat window. Save. No, that just entered to
Yeah,
send.
I'm
Yep.
not
I don't
seeing
have
a
access to
place
it.
for it on my end.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's only like, because I don't have full privileges. That's a Jack thing.
Uh,
But
You
Bess
should
has it.
be, sorry,
yeah,
you
I've got it, so I will send it out.
Okay.
okay. Tina, if it's a link, you can put it into the chat. Are you trying to attach it?
Mm. Yeah, it's a PDF.
Okay.
No worries.
All right. Well,
Bess
yeah.
has it. We'll make sure everybody gets it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Yep.
Sorry that it's not there, you two. But yeah, Bess, make sure that Nancy and Lynn get it
Oh, definitely.
So I went
loaded.
to, I forget which, whether this was McHenry County or DuPage County. I think it was uh, their conference one year, and someone was giving a talk on coal industry and talked about union archives
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
all of the stuff that's available in those, all of the
Yeah.
newsletters and and he showed us copies, some of them which had all sorts of detailed information about families in certain areas because they wanted to make it real family friendly. And I
Yeah.
thought that was just incredible.
Yes, that is a very good. Thank you for bringing that up because you're right. Union Records, um, what is his name? Mike Matea, is runs the he runs a statewide, is it unions? I'm drawing a blank on what it's called. But yeah, they have stuff that have been donated to them that they've put in their archives. But yeah, that's where Archive Grid would come in really handy because you could go into Archive Grid and say, okay, find me stuff on the IBEW 137, right? And it's going to tell you if those records are out there somewhere. So Archive Group would help you find some of those. And some of them are available through Chicago Collections Consortium because the records are in either UIC or at University of Chicago. So that's a great resource. And if you're doing Scottish research too, some of those guild records are available through the NRS or through some of the regional scan network archives in Scotland. So you can find some guild records too. So kind of the same thing for apprentices and guilds overseas too.
Yeah, I would think Lanarkshire would have a lot of those kind of records.
And where you
Yeah.
had like city archives at the end there, like you had New York City archives. I'm originally from New York and have family, long family there. And thing to always consider when you're looking at a city is what was it? Because the Brooklyn archives is different. Like,
Yeah, the Bronx archives is different too, I think. I think they have one for the Bronx. I thought they did.
um, because Brooklyn has its own public library system,
Hmm.
which
Oh,
is
they're
different from
amazing.
the New York Public Library because New York City only existed since 1898.
Hmm.
And so, like the Brooklyn Public Library has the Brooklyn Center for History, and I was
Hmm.
there. And so they've got everything about Brooklyn and Long Island
Oh, really?
Oh, okay.
because Brooklyn was considered, well, it's on Long Island, so it's considered part of Long Island.
Okay.
Um, so it's you kind of have to look at the history of where you're looking to see, okay, where might I find these? Or like,
Hmm.
so that if you're going to be looking a particular way.
Yeah. Yeah, you're never going to use just one facility for everything, right? It's just like a dartboard or an onion, right? You're going to keep peeling. You're going to keep those concentric rings coming out. Because like even in Chicago, Chicago Public Library has the regional archives too. So Sulzer Library on the north side has, archives related to the city of Chicago for residents. And then down in, is it Woodson? Down on the south side has like an absolutely enormous collection of like black funeral cards, like memorial cards, a huge collection of them. So if you had family on the south side, you'd go to Woodson and you would use that collection. And it's separate from Chicago History Museum, separate from the Chicago Regional Archives. Like it's separate. Each one of those has a different piece to that puzzle.
So it sounds like when coming up with one's research plan and thinking, okay, where might I find, certain types of records, one should always go to, archives to say, okay, what can exist? I know my ancestor, this person I'm trying to find information for, was he did this for a living. So can I find any information? What can I find on him? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not just, yeah, we're genealogists. We're definitely interested in, names and dates and who begat whom, but we're family historians and we need that meat on the bone. So like Bess's, family, right? Looking in that corporate archives, or my grandpa working for Campbell Soup, right? Or if they were in the military, finding information on the military unit and, any military engagements that they were involved in, or if they were active in society, were they president of the Lions Club, or were they active in, you know, the 19th century club or women's aid societies, right? All of that tells you who they were as people. You need to include that stuff. You might think, oh, it's boring. Who cares if he was in the Lions Club? Well, the Lions Club does some really good things and they have impacts within their communities. And you want to be able to say, look at the amazing things that they did to support their fellow man. Like that is an important part of who they were.
Yeah, my thing now is to take an ancestor and try, more recent, but yeah, figure out something about them. When I was taking one of the, was it the, one of the 8-week genealogy classes that is offered from various places. SLIG was one of them, I think I took,
Mhm.
and excuse me, picked one of my ancestors to research him, and I learned, okay, not only was he a shoemaker early in his life because his father was, but
Mhm.
he was an odd fellow. He was in a band, and in a little local newspaper it had how that Elias Snedeker dislocated his shoulder for the 12th time in the Goodwin's band room. I'm like, well, that's interesting. I wonder if he played trombone or something.
Yeah, that or the tuba. It's been a big instrument.
And now I have to contact the local history mu museum in New Jersey to find out more information. And
Mhm.
just by virtue of being in another genealogy group that has since disbanded from Central Jersey,
Hmm.
I found a woman that says, "Oh yeah, I work part-time at the history museum. Well, we've got lots of information on him." I'm like, "Holy crap! I just have to get together what I want to find out."
Yeah.
That's really cool. But it's true. I mean, there was a guy who used to come into my library and he would brag, "Oh, I've got 65,000 people in my family tree." And I said, "That's fantastic. I think I have like 1,200 in mine, right?" But I said, "Tell me five things about five of them." And he couldn't because it was all just about the chase. Like I just want to add him to my tree. I don't want to know anything about him. And how do you connect? Right? How do I tell my kids, here's what your great grandpa was like, right? If I don't know anything about him, right? You need to know something about them as a human in order to feel any type of bond with your lineage. So I'm glad you're doing that. I mean, it's an important part.
And it's
Yeah.
fun because it makes them people.
It
Yeah,
does make them
exactly.
people, and that's the important part. Like my grandma, before my grandma died, she was 92 when she died. I was asking her questions about her father because all the photos I have of my great grandfather are in black and white, right? And he died in 1969. He died before I was born. So I was asking her questions about him, and she paused, and I recorded these, thankfully. She paused and she looked at me. She says, "You know, you have green eyes just like my dad." Just as an aside, I'm the only person in my family that has green eyes. And had she not said that, I would have never have known that I share that connection with him because I'm the only one. Everybody else has either brown hazel, because hazel doesn't exist anymore, or brown eyes. So I'm the only one with green eyes. And it was just kind of an offhanded remark that she made, but it really made a connection between me and my great grandpa.
Sure.
Hmm.
Sure. I've got a book that my dad's cousin wrote about just a Revolutionary War era ancestor. He didn't fight in the Revolution because he was an Indian captive at the time. But there is a physical description of when he came back afterwards. And it sounds, except for the green eyes, it sounds like my dad. It's exact, with the dark hair and the long face and all that. It's like, well, I guess some genetics carry through 200 years.
Exactly. You want to be able to make that connection.
Yeah.
Sorry to say bye-bye. I have to go to my granddaughter's basketball game next, so I gotta
All
go
right.
Have fun. I hope they
Thanks,
win.
out the
thanks,
door. Yeah.
Nancy.
Oh, thank you for putting
All
this
right,
together and
I'll
putting it
stop
together on
talking. I'll let
Zoom.
everybody go. Poor
So,
Jack wants to get on. He can't wash dishes for an hour and a half. But thank you,
but
everybody.
no, thank
I'm
you, everybody.
appreciative for those of you who came.
This is
Thank you
great.
very much, Gina.
All
Yeah, it
right,
was
have a
great
great day.
information. Thank you so much.
Bye.
You're
Yes.
Good
welcome.
luck. Stay
Yes.
warm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thanks so
So,
much.
so
And
Bess, are you collecting people for the Highland
I,
Games yet?
I am starting to, yes. So you're
You know I'll be
volunteering.
there.
Good. Good.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going anywhere in June.
Okay. Yeah, great. Our first meeting, Jack said, is in February, but yeah, anybody, I'll start taking volunteers now.
And it's going to be at the in Wheaton again?
Yeah. Yes. At the county fairgrounds.
Yeah. Nice location.
Yeah. Not bad.
Wasn't there a possibility?
All right. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thanks. You too,
Bye.
Lynn.